welcome to day 3 of the World Cup and my little kind of summary of what's going on. I don't think I'm going to be taking half an hour on today's games, mainly because we had 2 0-0s, 2-1, which was actually probably the biggest result of the World Cup so far, and a very entertaining 4-1 win for France. So to start off with, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Australia. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about the Argentina-Saudi Arabia game, which happened this morning at the bright early hours of 10 in the morning. For those of you able to watch it, a very good game, a surprisingly good game. I did not expect the game to go as it did after about 10 minutes. I actually seem to remember writing these notes, and when I wrote these, I was like, this is going to turn out to be men against boys. It's when Messi scored the goal, I was like, right, Argentina have settled and Saudi have started playing this ridiculously high line. Just kind of thinking, okay, all it takes is one little ball through and the correctly timed run, and Argentina are in and they'll score. And the story ended up being, firstly, the penalty. That pull in the box is nowhere near as bad as Maguire's from yesterday, and yet it was given on VAR. I don't understand the inconsistency. I think it's a bit ridiculous. Yes, there's an argument that the defender pulls down Maguire as well as Maguire pulls down the defender in that scenario, but I don't know. I don't agree with that, but that's by the by. I do think it's a bit silly. And again, VAR shouldn't be getting involved in these subjective decisions. If the referee hasn't seen it, don't give it. Don't get involved. It's not worth it. Let teams actually win the game from actual football rather than just if they slightly tugged a player down a bit more than someone else did. It's just not worth it. But then obviously Messi scores the penalty, does a really good job. And I think Argentina were worth that lead at the time. But for some reason, they kind of stepped off it towards the end of that first half. It was a bit strange. It was like they were just happy to control the game at 1-0. And to be honest, I think they were right to. They were right to try and make sure the game was dead after about 40 minutes. I think the last 5 minutes they just spent knocking the ball around themselves. They've got to be careful. I think in future, when there's chances, and any team is like this, they need to be taking the chances when they see them. Having said that, I think Argentina's biggest failing today was not taking advantage of that high line from Saudi Arabia, because they showed every time they did get in, if the run was timed correctly, then they were in on goal, and it would have taken either a pass and a shot or just a shot and a goal. In fact, I think they had the ball in net 3 times, I think, outside of the goal that they scored, and none of them counted because they were all offside. And that is actually down to the runners. It's nothing to do with the person making the pass. They have to time it, yes, but if the runner's just standing offside, you're no use to the team that you're playing for. If you stand ahead of the back line and someone sees you in a position where they think, oh, there might be an on goal here, I'm going to play the pass, they have no depth perception and no ability to tell that you're offside there. It's up to you as the attacker to get yourself back onside. And it was a failing that they had all the way through. It was extremely frustrating to watch until obviously Saudi Arabia went in front. Having said that, I do think this tactic, as much as I've criticised it, if you can get it right, and if you're playing against an inept attack like Argentina were today, if you can get it right, it's very much like that Liverpool team from like 2019-20 where they played the offside trap and it worked every time, mainly because VAR got involved on those small opportunities where the referees didn't pick up the offside. Then because they had the digital technology to tell if they're like a toenails offside, you're much more likely to actually get the decision your way now than you would have done pre-VAR. So I do think that's a really an important point to make here, that Saudis, it's not just like a gun-ho, hell for leather approach where they just hope it works. It is actually quite a well-thought plan. And especially against a team like Argentina, who I wouldn't necessarily call Messi pacey these days. I think Martinez is, but apart from that, they've got Messi, Di Maria. They've not got that many runners who will hurt you with pace. They're not going to play France, I don't think, in this tournament. But if they end up playing France in this tournament, it'll be really interesting to see the pace of Dembele, Mbappe running in behind them. Like that, it would be basically it'd be like there's a massacre basically of that team, absolute massacre. I couldn't expect them to do that. Way too much space in behind for pacey Mbappe and Dembele. So. And then Saudi Arabia score after half time, which I think it was the shock that kind of provided, it was the shock factor that provided the result in the end. Because I think up until then, Saudi didn't look like they were going to, not that they weren't going to score, but they didn't look like they were going to be able to fashion enough creative endeavour to be able to make that attacking chance. Turns out they were actually throughout the game. I think Argentina were quite sloppy at the back, and it looked. I was making some notes before saying that basically this Argentina team, if they play against a team like Brazil or England or France, even Germany, Spain, they will lose because their defence is not good enough. They're playing Otamendi at the back still. I think the guy's 34, but he plays like a 40-year-old. He's so slow. And he looks old as well. And I saw a close-up of him. I think he had a spat with a Saudi Arabian player in the first half, and he just looked old. And I was like, well, I think if you're going to win the World Cup with the quality of teams at the top end of this tournament, you are going to either have to hope that they'll go out of their own accord, or that your defence is going to be as good as theirs. And it's just not from Argentina. It really isn't. And I can't see them winning the World Cup off of this result. I think and they didn't show the quality I was expecting defensively. I do think Lisandro Martinez coming on was weirdly an improvement, and yet actually they conceded. Did they concede after he came on? I don't think they did actually. He improved them going forward considerably because he was able to set things up, and he was actually quite tenacious at the back. But by that point, I think they just lost all composure. And this is probably one of my biggest criticisms of all the non-European nations. For some reason, all of those teams, on the whole, barring your world-class players like your Messis, I do think they just lack composure in the high-pressure moments, which is why the European teams have won World Cups consistently since 2002. And that's kind of disappointing, really. I'm really hoping that Brazil pull through and they're actually a threat this time. Because if Brazil aren't a threat, it's an all-European tournament again, pretty much, from the semi-finals onwards, I would expect. And that would be really disappointing, because I do think that the rest of the world should have caught up, at least relatively, by a relative amount by now, I would expect. So the first goal for Saudi Arabia was just a great run and finish. A really, really good finish. And what I wasn't sure about was whether Saudi Arabia would actually keep pressing after that moment. They did. They carried on. They kept the high line, the high press. Argentina didn't know what hit them. It was almost like they were a boxer on the ropes and they just couldn't get off. And then they scored again a few minutes later. And if you haven't seen this finish, you need to see it. It's absolutely brilliant. Emi Martinez does get a hand on it, which some people would say he should save, but I think it's so powerful it just goes through his hand. But the poor defending again from Argentina is just laughable. The amount of space that he gets on the left edge of the penalty area, just to turn and shoot. It's almost like they turned up for a pre-season match and they just allowed them to score, and they're like, okay, right, we'll go and score a couple more goals. They let themselves be caught by the trapdoor of we can get through this by just playing and just turning up and not competing. And in the end, being bullied, as the BBC commentators were saying, this was ITV, I think. As the ITV guys were saying, they were bullied. They were physically pushed around. To be fair, Argentina are, if you look at their front line, again, I'll go Di Maria, Messi, Lisandro Martinez less so, not Lisandro Martinez. What's his name now? The striker, Martinez. He's called Martinez. They've got so many Martinezes now. It's just really difficult to keep up. But all of that front line, it's all a lot of players who are just a bit weak physically, but great technically. And then you've got the other side of it, where you've got their two defensive midfielders, and they're both fairly strong physically, but not particularly strong technically. And that's a problem, I think. If you're going to win this tournament, again, you're going to need a really good defensive midfield pair or single player. So Tchouaméni played this evening, looked really good. Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham for England looked really good. I don't know if Casemiro will play for Brazil. I don't know. Well, I suppose we'll find out about that. So, yeah, we will see what happens with Argentina going forward. But as I say, if they play against a Brazil and they play like that and they don't manage to get themselves into a run of form before the end of the group stages, they're going to lose. They're just going to lose. The thankful thing for them is they've got potentially three games, assuming that they get through the group stage, to build up into a bit of form and just to figure out how they're going to play as a team. Because at the moment, especially their midfield looks really suspect. The defence looks suspect. I think they've suffered a couple of injuries, which is why Otamendi is playing. But honestly, people were expecting so much more from this Argentina team, and I think that's why people are so shocked by the result. Saudi Arabia are outside the top 50 in the world in terms of rankings. If you want to put rankings in a relevant factor in the World Cup, I personally don't really. I have like a tier system where I put a lot of teams in the top tier and then everyone else pretty much. It's because it's a cup tournament. So the other thing as well, I think some of the through balls towards the end of the game from Argentina were absolutely shocking. Just like overhit. It was like I was watching Brazilian league football where they tried to put impossible through balls into the box and no one's there. And it kind of speaks to this lack of quality in midfield. I think the fact that Messi had to be the one sitting back, providing those through balls into your Di Marias and Martinez's, it just doesn't work. I don't think it doesn't work. Messi's not as good as a holding midfielder as he is a striker or a centre forward. It's just, I shouldn't have to say that, but I am saying that. It's also the first time for Saudi Arabia. It's their first World Cup win, full stop, win at a World Cup since 1994, 28 years. And they chose to do it at their neighbour's house in Qatar, which I do find quite funny, I've got to say. As much as the Qataris may have been celebrating, because I think they would celebrate anyone from the Middle East winning a game, let alone getting through the group stages in this World Cup. But the fact that the Saudis have won this game, I don't think they don't like that. And probably just through sheer jealousy. But I do think that Saudi Arabia are leaps and bounds ahead of Qatar in terms of their football development. They've qualified for, I think, four World Cups in the last 6 or 7. I might be not quite enough, but the last 8, definitely since 94. So, but they've always lost or drawn all of their games and gone out in the group stages. The last time they went through from the groups was in 94 when they lost their first game, but then they won the next 2 in a group of 4 teams where 3 of them finished on 6 points and they went through. But the difficult thing for them was then getting into the knockout stages, and they lost in that as well. So well done to Saudi Arabia, I've got to say, and I'm really looking forward to what they do next. They just need to win one more game. If they win one more game, they're through. And they've beaten Argentina. And the 2 teams that they played, if I just go back to the scores for this, if I go back to the scores from today's games, there just wasn't a lot of impressive football from the other 2 games, which I'm going to touch on, but I'm not going to talk a lot about. Mexico against Poland. Poland missed a penalty. Robert Lewandowski, you couldn't make it up. He has a penalty and they save it. And then Denmark-Tunisia 0-0, and a lot of hard work, but not a lot of technical quality. Welcome to Denmark. welcome to Tunisia. I do think that France will win that group very, very easily. I think the one team they might struggle against might be Denmark, because I do think they'll be happy defending deep. And I think they'll do better against France than Tunisia and Australia will, but they will also be happy playing physical up front. The only difference is I do think France are very well equipped to deal with that with players like Konate, and I've forgotten their other centre-back. But they've got plenty of height, plenty of strength at the back, and they're fairly well organised. So I would be fine with that. As far as France is concerned, wow. Kind of came out of the blue, really. They did look very slick for the first 10 minutes before they conceded. And then as soon as they conceded, you could tell in the stadium, there was a bit of a feeling of, are we going to see another shock? Is there another shock on the cards? We've already seen one this morning. And then I think France just started to put their foot on Australia's necks and strangle them. And that's basically what you saw. And this is why I'm making them my favourites for this tournament, because they're capable of doing that to anyone in this tournament, let alone Australia. Australia in the past have been difficult to play against. I don't think this is the best Australian team that we've seen at a World Cup for a little while, but it's still Australia, and they fight for everything. But this French team, technically, absolutely brilliant, playing between the thirds, happy to keep the ball. Griezmann played an instrumental role in keeping the ball in that kind of 10 and 8 position, and then playing it back to the centre-backs to retain possession, or do a couple of little flicks, get it into Giroud and Mbappe and Dembele. And then, Mbappe was scintillating to watch from start to finish. Hopefully he managed to get through the whole tournament unscathed and doesn't get injured, and we get to see him play all the way through. I think he could end up being the Golden Boot winner, possibly. But he's playing more of an assisting role at this point, I think. Playing on the left-hand side, yes, he's a goal threat, but I do think he can play into Giroud quite a lot in a way that he wouldn't have been able to into Benzema, I think, because Giroud, I think, is just better in the penalty area, being aware of what position he needs to be in to receive the cross. Scored twice today, Giroud. That's 51 goals, which is the same as Thierry Henry for France, it says a lot, I think. He is so underrated by so many people, including Arsenal fans, from back in the day when Arsenal were playing. Although I wouldn't have him back now, but I do think he's a quality player, and he deserves every accolade he gets at this point. He's stuck it through, and I do think the best accolade should be reserved for those players who are doubted quite a lot and come back from that and actually achieve on the world stage, and that's exactly what Olivier Giroud has done. 2 goals. Mbappe scored from a header, weirdly, and the fourth goal. What's the goal I'm missing? I can't remember what the other goal was. They did score 4 goals though, and to be honest, I think by the time France went back 2-1 ahead by half time, it felt like the game was over at that point. They would be able to control it. Australia, I think, barring that goal, I think a couple of things happened for the Australia goal, which basically meant it was a bit of a freak. It wasn't something that was going to happen very often in this game, where the right winger for Australia got past the left back, Hernandez, and Hernandez injured himself while he was falling down, so he wasn't even going to be in a position to actually block the cross in. And then the only defensive mistake really that the right back, whose name I've forgotten, let's see, Pavard. The only mistake that Pavard made in pretty much the whole game, I think, was not tracking back the winger who ended up scoring for Australia. Not tracking back, where is he now? Goodwin. And not tracking Goodwin back into his own penalty area. And that's why he was free, that's why they scored. I just think that was such an anomaly, because France were able to control the counter pretty much from there right to the end of the game. And they seemed to get an idea tactically of what Australia were doing. So that's those 2 games, and all the games that we've seen today. Good watching football today. As far as tomorrow is concerned, I'm going to get to tomorrow in a second, because there's one little couple of news things which popped up today in the world of football. Firstly, Ronaldo has left Man United by mutual consent, which is usually the kind of thing you say about managers. But in this case, Ronaldo is so big that he has to kind of have this manager status when he leaves. I think it's absolutely the correct move from both sides. But I do think that Ronaldo has messed this up big time. I think if he had just kept his mouth stum and made noises internally, I think he may well have gotten a better result out of Man United. Because I'm assuming that they haven't paid a penny to him since he left because of they're going to say legal grounds. If he had just stayed quiet and then made noises internally and threatened to make noises externally but not actually do it, I think he probably would have gotten a lot more for himself than he did, if that's even what he's interested in, which I can't assume what someone else thinks in that way. But it's kind of sad to see a player, an icon like that, leave in such a way. But it's very Man United. They seem to find a way of messing up old players quite often. You think about Roy Keane leaving under a cloud. Think about David Beckham leaving under a cloud. Even Robin van Persie left, I think, having been there for one season and won the league and got the Golden Boot and played amazing, and then from there on and just disappeared from United. And I think he left a couple of years afterwards, in the middle of Van Gaal's era, and it was never seen again. So I'm trying to think of other examples. So I think it's good for United. I think they've got enough players, and those wages that they're going to save are now going to go towards another big signing, which will probably happen in the summer, which is a big deal for them, I think, because they do need a striker of some kind. I've heard Osimhen being mentioned. Gakpo, I don't think is quite at the tier that they're looking for. But if they're going for this kind of young, up-and-coming style player to go with their Rashfords and Antonys and their other kind of players like that, I think they're going to need to do something a bit different. Going forward, they need Martial fit. Because if Martial isn't fit, at the moment, their only other option is Rashford. And I personally don't think that Rashford works particularly well as a number 9. I think he works better off the wing just because of his pace, his trickery. He can take long shots, and he's okay at crossing the ball. I don't think he's amazing. And he seems to be kind of back on it and concentrating on his game now, whereas before, I think last season especially, he just was not concentrated at all. So where does Ronaldo go? Where does he go? It's tricky to think because, I think personally I would love to see him at PSG, because I think he'd actually probably be a brilliant player to have at PSG, because at the moment all they're lacking is that kind of target front man. The only problem is, I think he's in an impossible situation, because if he goes to a Champions League club like PSG, or even Sporting Lisbon to an extent, he's going to have to accept not playing every week. Will Cristiano Ronaldo, ever accept that? I don't think so. The alternative is going to somewhere like Saudi Arabia or the US or China and trying to get as much money as possible out of his career. But obviously that would be forsaking any kind of records he has in the Champions League and any kind of records he has in winning trophies. And probably the ever winning the Ballon d'Or again, although I do think that's now gone. So what will he do? I think he'll go to a PSG or maybe even a Chelsea. They have already just signed one aging striker. They're probably going to sign another one. And possibly Sporting Lisbon, although they have come out and said they're never going to buy him because his wages are too much. So, well, let's wait and see. Sporting are in the Champions League post-January, but will they be after a while? I don't think so. I can't see them winning their last 16 tie, whoever that's against. So, I suppose I'll have to wait and see. Other news, Pep Guardiola has signed 2 more years at Man City. Really annoying. As an Arsenal fan, I was partially hoping that he might leave in the summer and then we'd be left just to go and win the league next year. That's not happening, is it? We might still win the league next year. I do think that we can go toe to toe with City these days, I think. But Without a Pep there, I think I would almost consider us outright favourites for a league season before it's even started. That makes a really big difference. So we'll see what happens with that. Pep obviously is one of the best managers in the world. Man City are extremely lucky to have him, and I think they would bend over backwards to keep him in whatever scenario it is. The only person who's going to let Pep Guardiola leave Man City is himself, and I think that's it. I don't think anyone else is going to persuade him to leave, and I don't think anyone else could stop him from leaving if he wanted to leave. So, day 4 tomorrow, we start off with Morocco against Croatia, and then we go to Germany against Japan, then Spain, Costa Rica, then Belgium, Canada. What are the games I'm interested in here? Because technically there's a big hitter in all 4 of those games. Germany, Spain, Croatia, and Belgium. All 4 have either done well at a previous World Cup or a previous Euros or both. Belgium, I think, is their last chance with this golden generation of actually doing something in a World Cup. Germany just want to hit back after the terrible World Cup they had last time, and the terrible Euros, losing to England as well. For them, I think getting to a quarter-final or a semi-final is now almost seen as a minimum requirement. And Hansi Flick, who's the manager now, this is his first tournament. It'll be interesting to see how he manages a tournament team compared to a club team. And then Spain, Costa Rica. I've heard Spain are in all sorts of turmoil at the moment, so we'll see what happens with them. But Costa Rica, as we know from, what was it, 8 years ago, in the 2014 World Cup, they're no mugs. They can do a good job against a good team. The only problem for them is I think Germany, Japan, and Spain are difficult to play against at the best of times. But right now, I think they're right up there. Japan have got a good team. I would expect Costa Rica to finish last in that group. So, yeah. And just lastly, a quick apology. Last video, I zoomed in accidentally using my watch on the video, which meant that you saw a really big close-up of my beard for about 25 minutes. You don't have to see that. Thankfully, I put an image over that, so you don't have to see that. But that just explains what was happening there. Normally, this would be just a video of me talking and trying to share my opinion on what happens in the football day. So thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed today. And if you want to see more, then subscribe to the channel. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.